In the beginning was the Word, and it was spoken. For millennia, our primary communication method was oral communication. That's why we talk about the oral tradition. Written communication, text, was time-consuming, it was tedious, it was expensive, and very few people understood it. Things changed remarkably in 1440 AD. In Mainz, Germany, a man named Johannes Gutenberg, which many of us in this room will be familiar with, invented the modern printing press, and it changed everything. All of a sudden, at scale, we could communicate information, knowledge, everything that we wanted to communicate about our family history, our country's history. There was a revolution in mathematics, science, and the humanities because we are now able to build on the expertise of others because we could share this information more effectively. We found that it was really effective for correspondence. When computers came along, it was a great way to input data. What we found was we moved from an era up till 1440, which was mostly about the spoken word, and then we moved into an era which was about entering text and data, typing, manual interaction in order to tell our story, to share information. Now, the computer industry recognized this, and Gutenberg really had a textual stranglehold on how we interact with these devices. But voice is back. And it's back because conversation is back because natural language processing technology has advanced tremendously in the last decade. There's a lot of terms associated with it, neural nets, deep learning. What I can tell you from a practical standpoint is voice now understands, or computers now understand what you say, and then they can do something with that. So how do we know that this is actually a thing? How do we know that this is something that is out there? And one of the first places I look as an empiricist is I look at popular culture. Voice assistants, voice technology is showing up on The Tonight Show, on South Park, on Saturday Night Live, on countless YouTube parodies. Apple Siri, Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, we see them on their phones, we see them in smart speakers like the Amazon Echo, we see them in other smart speakers like Google Home and the Apple HomePod. The adoption has really been tremendous. And when you look at it, if we go back to where we started in the modern era of voice, we can look at a point in time in 2011 when Apple Siri was introduced. Now, it was introduced to the amazement of many people, which was followed by sort of broad scorn because it couldn't quite live up to all that great marketing that Apple did around it. But it started to change people's set of expectations. And then in 2014, when Amazon introduced the Echo, they didn't try to oversell it, and the technology was much better. It could do more things, it could understand more things. They leveraged the modern capabilities around automated speech recognition, natural language understanding, and it received tremendous user reviews. So as that's starting to get more adopted, 2 years later, Google introduces Google Home. And what we've seen is just a tremendous adoption rate. Smart speakers over a 4-year period went from 0 to 100 million devices worldwide. About 70% of those are in the US. You can imagine how large that is and how fast that growth rate is. Now, it took Apple Siri about 7 years to be available on 500 million devices worldwide. Google Assistant came along, 2 years to become available on 500 million devices. This is the level of adoption and the rate of adoption that we're talking about. And this leads to a conclusion here. The Activate Forecast looked at technologies we've adopted over the last century or so, and smart speakers adoption is growing much faster than smartphones, which I think surprises many people, certainly faster than TV, but even faster than the internet. So the adoption curve is nearly vertical. But it's not just smart speakers. Smartphones, it's headphones and earbuds, it's televisions, automotive in the car, many people have used that. It's even in appliances. And in fact, last month, there was the introduction of the first voice-activated microwave. Now, there were a lot of snickers about it when it first came out. But then when you actually think about it, there's some really good use cases. You're right next to it, but yet it's that much easier to do when you have voice. And that's one of the things that I think people underestimate, is how many use cases and how useful they are with voice. But the other thing that this tells us is that voice is a thing. It's not a theory. It's not a speculation that consumers will start adopting it. They are adopting it. It's a reality. And this is a reality that people in the elder living communities have to be aware of because it's changing expectations. The other thing it tells us is that microphones are almost everywhere. In fact, they're nearly ubiquitous now. What that means is we're going to be able to talk into just about anything. The places we're in, when we're mobile, into our devices. Some people think that it's a user interface revolution, that it's really just when we're hands-free and eyes-free, when we're walking, when we're exercising, when we're driving, when we're cooking, we will be able to speak, we'll be able to interact with technology, we'll be able to pull up information even though we don't have the use of our hands or eyes because they're otherwise occupied. But that's not really it. It is true that those are benefits of it. But that's not the fundamental change that's going on. The fundamental change is in the past, we always had to learn the language of the technology to use the technology. We all used a steering wheel to learn how to communicate with the automobile. The steering wheel is the language of that device. We learned how to type to input information into computers. We learned how to use a mouse to interact with a computer screen. We learned how to pinch, swipe, and touch in order to work with our iPad or our mobile phone. The difference today is that voice turns that around. We always learn the language of the technology. Today, the technology understands our language, the language that we communicate in. That language is actually your voice. Okay, so what does this mean from a use case standpoint? So entertainment is a really common use case for voice. You know, if you look at smart speakers, the most common daily and monthly use case is actually pulling up information like radio, music, comedy, talk radio. That's what people do. And you know, it seems like a little thing, but it's all of a sudden you're able to say, hey Google, play the radio station, or hey Alexa, pull up this song. And it's just that simple. And you know what? It's not just music. I mean, people think about that because of the smart speakers. They're almost ubiquitous now. We're talking about over 20% of US population has these, and the growth rate is actually accelerating for adoption. But it's also television. You look at Roku, you look at NVIDIA Shield, you look at Xfinity, you look at the satellite providers. They know they have to have voice in order to navigate their visual media, or else the consumers will go elsewhere. It's also about information. ComScore says that in 3 years, 50% of all search will be done by voice. Why? Because it's faster. Who wants to fumble with their phone to type in the query to get the information? You can just speak and you can get it back, and it's like having an expert in the room with you who's just speaking with you at any given time. There's also communication. You can just bring it up very quickly and you don't have to look through your contacts. You just say, I want to call my daughter, and it happens. You can just say, I want to send a text message, and say what the message is, and you can say send, and it happens. Productivity. You can add items to a shopping list so that you can get them later. You can do it while your hands are busy. You could be washing the dishes. You can pull up your calendar immediately. From a shopping standpoint, if you're out of something, you just say reorder, and it happens. Right? These are all little things, but cumulatively they have a tremendous impact. From a smart home standpoint, you're able to control your thermostat, your lights. You're able to change your television station. You're able to do all these different things by speaking and not having to fumble with some new piece of technology. And even when it comes to health and wellness, it's easier to record that data, and it's easier to get information back about it. You know, I think about a guest I had on my podcast not too long ago, Kathy Pearl. She works for Google now, but she spent many years in the healthcare space. And one of the things they were doing is they were helping physicians collect data from patients while they were at home. And they had an online portal that people could type in information. And then they added voice as an option for an input. What happened? The patients actually logged in more often. When they did log in, they gave them more data. And guess what? The data was more accurate. So typing and text became a barrier to actually getting that information. Now, let's talk about this from a practical consideration. And let's talk about it specifically about our elder community, because the digital revolution has left a lot of people behind. And one of the groups is clearly our elder community. Voice makes interaction easier. So you think about this idea of small buttons to type in, small text to read. Voice, you just ask and you receive it. So that interaction is a significant difference, and it can really change people's lives. I think about another guest from my podcast who talked about the first week they started the business. They said, okay, we want to do something around voice. They put a smart speaker in the home of a gentleman who was legally blind, and they left it there for a week, and they came back and they said, what did you think? He said, it changed my life. I have access to things that I've never had access to before. Another thing I want to talk about is this idea of control. We talked about smart home. Talk about the independence that people have, that they don't have to ask somebody to help them. They can actually just say something and things change for them. And the house is more comfortable. And then there's communication. There's tools like Ask My Buddy, which will allow you to say a simple phrase and it'll contact multiple people. So if you need to reach out to people very quickly, it really makes a big difference for the elder community who might otherwise be isolated, as we talked about yesterday with one of our speakers. And one of the most popular topics today is aging in place. And I think we heard yesterday about this idea of living in place. It's not just passing the time, it's actually having a more fulfilling experience. And voice is really transforming things because of this idea that you can have more independence. You're not cut off. You have communication. You can call your family easily, or you can add items to a shopping list that's shared with your daughter who might be at the store bringing things over for you today. So all those things enable people to be more independent and have a much better chance of actually living a rich and fulfilling life at home. But let's talk about our elder communities as well. Voice is having an impact there, and voice can have an even bigger impact. So if you think about when someone wakes up in the morning, what do they need? So if they have limited mobility, one of the things that they might need is to turn on the lights, maybe turn on the TV, open the blinds. With voice technology, they can just set up what they call a routine. They can just say, Alexa, good morning, or hey, Google, it's time to wake up. And all those things happen automatically. They don't have to call for someone. They don't have to wait. They don't have to feel like they're helpless and they need someone else to help them. They start their day off on a positive note because they have that control and they start it. Now think about this from the organizational level, from the caregiver level. What does it mean for them? Well, they don't have to go around to every room to do the routine tasks. The residents can do it themselves. So what does that mean then? They can spend more time with the residents attending to other needs as opposed to things that anybody could do, you would think, but are really important if they can't do it for themselves. And so I just bring this up is another point. There are a lot of home builders in the US that are today actually pre-installing voice and smart home technology into their communities. And they do that because it makes those communities more attractive to the home buyers. There's other apartment management companies that are doing the same thing, and this is something that the elder residential communities are going to have to think very clearly about. And one company that's done this in San Diego, Front Porch, has had tremendous success with this already. And you think about one of the women who had the opportunity to have a smart speaker in their house said, everything is better with Alexa, right? Because they had that control, they had that ability to have more independence, and it really transformed their lives. So as you think about this, and you think about where the future is going, and you think about this idea that you can create a better experience, you can be a more attractive community, and you can have more operational efficiency where your caregivers can focus more on needs that require humans and not the mundane tasks. Voice is really transformative, and it is the technology that will make a significant difference. So let me return to Gutenberg. Thomas Pettit, who's an academic out of the UK, calls the last 600 years the Gutenberg parenthesis. It was preceded by an oral tradition, and today, now, voice is coming back. And it's coming back because the technology has progressed to the point where it understands us. We no longer need to learn the language of the technology can understand our language. And the people that most need this, the elder community, are really going to be disproportionately benefited by it. It's just a matter of us making sure that it becomes available. Everyone, thank you for being here today. Welcome to the Voice Revolution.